We have our list of users, we have our single user. Let's move forward and give the ability to edit a user. We'll add an edit button here. We'll go to a new route, which is going to be a new component. In that component, we're going to update a user. We'll start by creating the brand new component. Under users, user edit, we'll create a new file, user edit.component.ts. We'll need the user and user service. We'll need to inject that in the constructor. We'll have the user. And on init, we'll need to grab that user, just like we did in the user single component. We'll need the router, so we'll need from the Angular router, we'll need the activated route. And this is how we're going to get the information, their ID from the route. Add that to the constructor. Let ID equal this.route.snapshot. Now we can actually get that user, pass in the ID, this is looking very similar to our user single component, and all we're really doing right now is grabbing that user. We'll go ahead and use that user, display them in user edit component, and then we'll handle the update the user here. And this is where we'll add all that information there. Now we need that template file, user edit.component HTML. I am the edit component. And we'll just do that now just to make sure everything's routed and working correctly. Now that we have a new component, we need to bring it into app module. We can bring this into app routing now. We'll copy that import. And we will uncomment out that. Next, we have our routing. So to get to this route, we'll go ahead and create a link in user single. And right above here, let's just add a button here. Button, button primary, and button small. And these are Bootstrap classes. We'll just say edit is the link name. And since we are using Angular2's router, we'll use router link. And we're going to use the parameter binding way since we want to pass in an ID here. We'll have the array that we pass in. The first part is users. The second part is going to be the user ID. And the third part is edit. Now notice that is going to match the app routing we just created. We have users, ID, and edit. Let's take a look at our app. We have our edit button here. If we click that, we'll go to users 1 edit, and we have our edit component. Everything's working perfectly. Let's hash out this HTML here so that we can get it to look like an edit form. We'll open up user edit component. We already have the user here, so we'll start with div ng-if user. We'll create our form, and on ng-submit, we're going to call the method that we will create called update user. Now we'll have form group, label inside of that. This is for name. Input type is text. Class is form control. Name is name. And we'll use our ng model two-way data binding, since we already brought in the forms module earlier. We'll do ng model user.name. And a button, type is submit, .button success. Update user. We already got the information for our user and we are two-way data binding it. This means that our form should automatically populate with the user that we have. Let's go take a look. And right now our application is not showing that form, which means we had a problem binding that user to the user for this template. Let's go take a look. We have this.service.getUser, subscribe user, this user is equal to user. And that's where our issue was. Now that we've actually taken that new user we got, bound it to this.user for this class, the template has access to it, and we can see that our name and username are automatically populated because of the two-way data binding. Let's open up the console. If we hit update user, notice that nothing will go correctly because we don't have that update user method that we want to use. Here we used ng submit update user. Let's create that now. Let's add a real doc block in here, update the user. Now we haven't created this yet on our service, but we'll go ahead and write it as if we did. This.service.update user. And this is where we would pass in a user. So that would be this.user. And here we'll subscribe. Let's go take a look at our API again and see what's going on in there. res.in. On an update, where we put a user, what we're going to get back is a user. And we'll have the update at that time. Let's go ahead and say here when we subscribe, we'll get a user back. And right now we don't really need to do anything here, so we'll just leave that blank. Actually, let's console log user was updated. Notice that update user doesn't exist. That's because our user service doesn't have an update user method. TypeScript is really generous at showing us that error. We'll open up user service. And let's start building out that update user. We're going to get a user, which is an instance of user, and we'll return an observable, which has a user inside of it. If we go look at our API and we see our update, we have the ability to use HTTP verb put or patch. Now there's some slight differences between those, but for now, since we're doing an update, we'll use the first one. We'll do put. Return this.http.put, and we'll use that template string with that URL we have. User.id. Now notice I didn't do .data here, and that's because when we looked at the API, there was no .data inside of the response object. And we'll map that and catch this .handle error. Now we're getting an error here. That's because we put, but we didn't actually pass in the information. So we have the URL, and we have to pass in the information, which is the user. That should be good enough to go. Let's go take a look at our app. We can delete some information, just write whatever we want, click update user. The user was updated. And how do we exactly know that we actually made a request to our recres.in API? We can go take a look at the network tab. And notice if we click on the latest one, it's a put request to recres API users 1, which is George's ID. And we can look at the preview and the response. So that way we know that we actually hit our API, we updated our user, And this edit form is perfect. Now, since we're using this fake API, none of this information that we sent through gets saved. So we can't go back to the user section and see that difference here where we changed his name. Right now, we know it worked because we can see in our console that it worked. And we can also see from the network tab that that request went through. That will wrap it up for updating a user. We've been able to grab the user, pass in new information using two-way data binding, and then create a put request to the API to update that user. Now, if you had your own database where you could write to that database, these changes would definitely show when you went back to the list. We'll definitely be creating a longer, more robust CRUD style application for Angular 2 in another course. But for now, what I'd like to take some time to do is in our edit form, a lot of times when you're editing something, there's going to be errors. Maybe somebody input a blank and maybe your server doesn't like how that input comes in. It's really important to handle errors when you're dealing with these forms and HTTP, so we'll go ahead and take a look at how we can show messages to our users.